All I know, the only thing I see is a single letter from the ranking member that was sent in 2019 that he didn't like the plea deal, and some people signed on to that. The real truth is we didn't hear from them at all. Nobody asked Director Wray about Epstein before this committee. Nobody was that concerned. Where was the concern for the victims then? Tell the truth time. The truth is, it's politically useful for them to try to do this now, even though they didn't give a damn about it in the past. That's an insult to the victims, and that's an insult to America. There are family members here. There are family members who are concerned. God Almighty, we want to get to the truth of that. I ask you, please, to meet with them, to talk to them, and to investigate this with truth. We have the largest Hindu temple in the world. They were attacked. They were put up against the wall with guns to their heads. So it isn't just a Catholic or Christian thing. American Jews were targeted in colleges and universities, and a lot of folks in the FBI, in the past FBI, not this one, didn't give a damn. How are we restoring trust for Catholics, for Hindus, for Jews, for parents, for all the other, for just American people that were targeted by FISA because they had a different viewpoint?
Or the Hindu incident you talked about at the largest temple in North America. Any institution of faith and any member of faith will not be investigated by this FBI because they are men and women of faith ever, period.
Not one Democrat asked Director Wray about Epstein. Not once. Not twice. He was in front of this committee multiple times. Nobody asked. Congressman Van Drew sat through the entire previous exchange, watched Democrats demand Epstein accountability from Patel, and then stood up and asked the question nobody wanted answered. Where were you when it actually mattered? Where was the moral righteousness when Wray was in that chair? Where was the urgency for justice? Where was the concern for victims? Where the hell was the integrity? Then he goes further. Catholics labeled radical threats for praying with rosaries. Parents at school boards called terrorists. Hindu holy men put against a wall with guns to their heads at the largest Hindu temple in the world. American Jews targeted at universities. And the FBI, according to Van Drew, didn't give a damn. This is the other side of this hearing that most coverage completely ignores. Same room, same day, completely different argument. Let's get into it. And subscribe now, because this series covers every angle of every hearing, not just the ones that fit one narrative.
Mr. Patel, thank you for being here. I know it's been an interesting and difficult 2 days. And I wasn't going to talk about the Epstein thing because there's a lot of other issues that affect the FBI, but I have to say a few words. I've sat here, I've listened to this, I've watched it, and you know, my Democratic colleagues are so concerned now, Mr. Patel, all of a sudden. Where were they last year? Where were they the year before? Where were they the year before that? Where was the last president in any of this? All I know, the only thing I see is a single letter from the ranking member that was sent in 2019 that he didn't like the plea deal, and some people signed on to that. Most of the truth, the real truth, let's be honest, let's be intellectually honest. The real truth is we didn't hear from them at all. Anybody of them. Hardly any of them ever mentioned it. Some of them didn't mention it at all until the beginning of this year. Earlier in the year it started. Not one Democrat asked Director Wray. We all remember Director Wray was here. Not once, not twice, multiple times. Nobody asked Director Wray about Epstein before this committee. Nobody was that concerned. Where was the concern for the victims then? Where was the moral righteousness then? Where was the outrage then? Where was the sense of duty then? Where was the desire for accountability then? Where was the urgency for justice then? Most of all, where the hell was the integrity then? You know what the truth is. Let's just say it, man. Tell the truth time. The truth is, it's politically useful for them to try to do this now, even though they didn't give a damn about it in the past. And you know what? That's an insult to the victims, and that's an insult to America. Continue to do the work you're doing. Continue to uncover what needs to be uncovered.
Van Drew's argument lands harder than most Democratic criticism of Patel in this series. Not because it defends Patel's record, but because it challenges the credibility of the people doing the attacking. The Director Wray point is factually verifiable and genuinely significant. If Democrats on this committee had multiple opportunities to question the previous FBI director about Epstein and didn't, while Epstein's case files sat in the same building, then the urgency being performed in this hearing requires some explanation beyond genuine concern for victims. The 2019 letter detail is the sharpest specific fact in Van Drew's argument. One letter. The ranking member, unhappy about the plea deal. That's the documented Democratic Epstein record before this year. Against that backdrop, the intensity of the current questioning reads differently than it would if there were a consistent track record of demanding accountability. But here's where honest analysis gets complicated. The fact that Democrats didn't ask about Epstein when Wray was here doesn't mean the questions being asked of Patel now are wrong. Selective timing of accountability is a legitimate criticism. It's not a rebuttal of the underlying questions. Both things can be true simultaneously. The Democrats' timing is politically motivated, and Patel's Epstein answers deserve scrutiny. Van Drew chooses to make this about the questioners rather than the answers. That's a deliberate strategic choice, and it's one that effectively shifted the room's energy after the chaos of the previous exchange. What he raises next goes to something entirely different, a documented pattern of FBI targeting that he says preceded Patel and cannot be allowed to return.
One real quick thing before I say anything to 9/11. We know that was mishandled by the past director and by the past FBIs. There are family members here. There are family members who are concerned. God Almighty, we want to get to the truth of that. I ask you, please, to meet with them, to talk to them, and to investigate this with truth. You know, in the Biden administration, we went through a very dark and difficult period of time. The FBI trust was broken with the people. Catholics were, this is the stuff we've been talking about, were labeled radical threats for praying in their churches with their rosaries. Parents at school boards were called terrorists for standing up for their children. Hindu holy men in New Jersey. We have the largest Hindu temple in the world. They were attacked. They were put up against the wall with guns to their heads. So it isn't just a Catholic or Christian thing. American Jews were targeted in colleges and universities, and a lot of folks in the FBI, in the past FBI, not this one, didn't give a damn. We can't go back to targeting religion. We can't go back to silencing free speech. The Biden administration did that. So I got questions for you. Hopefully thoughtful questions that you can answer for us in a thoughtful way. How is this FBI now, under your leadership, how are we restoring trust for Catholics, for Hindus, for Jews, for parents, for all the other, for just American people that were targeted by FISA because they had a different viewpoint? How are we restoring that trust in the FBI?
Multiple ways, sir. One, and maybe most importantly, is through transparency and providing the American public with the material so they can see, read it themselves as to what the abuses were in the past, whether it relates to the Catholic memo or the Hindu incident you talked about at the largest temple in North America. Any institution of faith and any member of faith will not be investigated by this FBI because they are men and women of faith ever, period.
And nor should they.
The incidents Van Drew describes here aren't political talking points. They're documented events with paper trails. The Catholic Richmond memo is perhaps the most thoroughly documented example. An FBI field office memo that recommended recruiting informants inside Catholic parishes, distributed to over 1,000 agents, initially denied to Congress, then exposed by a whistleblower. Previous Director Wray testified it was one field office. That turned out to be false. Multiple offices were involved. A second memo existed. The school board parents' terrorism designation is also documented. A 2021 memo from A.G. Garland directing federal law enforcement resources toward parents at school board meetings following a National School Boards Association letter. The memo was later walked back, but the designation happened. The Hindu temple incident Van Drew references, guns to heads at the largest Hindu temple in the world, is the most extreme example and deserves specific investigation rather than a passing reference. That's a significant allegation about federal law enforcement conduct that Van Drew raises without full context, but that clearly affected his constituents in New Jersey directly. Patel's commitment, no institution of faith investigated because of faith, sources no longer placed in religious institutions without criminal justification, is the right policy. Whether it holds in practice is what oversight hearings like every session documented in this series are designed to verify. The Southern Poverty Law Center and ADL source question is the most institutionally significant policy point Van Drew raises. These are organizations whose designation lists have historically been used by law enforcement agencies to identify potential threat actors. Patel's answer, objectivity, neutrality, and decency in source evaluation is a commitment without specifics. Whether partisan source designations have actually been removed from the systems that drive FBI investigations is a question that deserves a follow-up hearing with documentation. Van Drew closes with the line that captures both his frustration and his hope. There was a lot of bull today, but the work of the people continues. Whether that assessment of the day's proceedings reflects what actually happened in this room, or what someone wanted to have happened, is ultimately a judgment the public has to make for themselves.
Nor should they. I don't mean to interrupt you, but my God, of all the amendments to the freedom of speech, freedom to believe in what you want to believe in, I know you're standing up for that. Continue. The Richmond memo was driven by a reliance on sources. The Southern Poverty Law Center, the words sound nice, but the organization's not so nice. And we've seen the Anti-Defamation League distort data that counts as violence. Have you been able to identify and eliminate these kinds of partisan sources? We welcome all sources, but we want objectivity and neutrality and decency in the way we report all this. Have you been able to uncover any information there? How do we make sure our sources are good in the future?
We have reviewed the source processes that infiltrate any institutions of faith, and they will no longer be going into institutions of faith. They will be directed towards criminal activity and protecting the homeland, the two most important missions the FBI has, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Good. And I'll say this, there was a lot of bull today, a lot of you-know-what, and I'm not going to say it because I respect the institution so much going on around here. Continue to do the work of the people. You are here for that reason. The administration is here for that reason. It was weaponized and politicized, the FBI, in the past. I hope to God we never, ever see that again. One of the darkest parts of American history.
Patel's faith community commitment lands as the clearest policy line he draws in this entire exchange. No source is placed inside religious institutions without active criminal or terrorism justification. That's not a talking point. That's a documented policy change from what the Richmond memo represented. Van Drew's response: of all constitutional amendments, freedom of speech and freedom of belief are the most foundational, isn't partisan framing. It's the principle that makes the Catholic memo, the school board parents designation, and the Hindu temple incident all fall under the same institutional failure. When federal law enforcement treats religious practice or political viewpoint as a threat indicator, something fundamental about the government's relationship with its own citizens has broken. Then the closing. A lot of bull today. Continue doing the work. That's Van Drew's honest summary of what he watched in this room, and it cuts both ways. Because the bull he's referring to includes the chaos, the time fights, the unanswered yes or no questions, the survivors in the building who still haven't met with the FBI director, and the 9/11 families sitting in that room right now. He tells Patel the FBI was weaponized and politicized in the past, and he hopes to God it never happens again. One of the darkest parts of American history, he calls it. Here's what this entire hearing leaves unresolved. Two completely different pictures of the same FBI, painted in the same room on the same day. Jaipal's version: a director covering up Trump's name in Epstein files, refusing to call survivors credible, dodging a yes or no question 4 times. Van Drew's version: a director cleaning up an institution that targeted Catholics, parents, Hindus, and Jews while the other side looked away. Both have documented evidence. Neither is complete without the other. That gap is exactly what this series exists to show you. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.